I quit my $120,000 a year income to sell mushrooms out of my basement. Hi. Hi, my name is Pat. This is my very first YouTube video, so just bear with me because it's not like I'm talking to a person, I'm just talking to a black stick. I want to tell you my story about how I quit my very comfy corporate job, making a six-figure income, to now selling mushrooms out of my basement and having a very successful business. It all started with a girl. So, I guess it started with a relationship that I was in. I was dating this girl that she was a ballroom dance instructor and she was a mindfulness coach. And I don't know if she's gonna look at this, but I don't really care. I'm not gonna say her name though. So I was dating this girl and she goes one day, we're gonna meditate. And I said, sure, I can do that, whatever. So we sat down at my kitchen table and she put a timer on for 10 minutes and we closed our eyes. It was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon and we meditated. After the 10 minutes was up and the buzzer rang, she goes, how was it for you? And I said, great. And I told her my whole story about this little journey that I went on for this little daydream for 10 minutes. And I go, at the end of my story, I go, how was it for you? And she goes, it was good. I focused on my breath. And I said, what? She was able to calm her mind and silence her thoughts to the point where she would only focus on her breath. And I was intrigued by that because I literally grasped onto every single thought that was coming into my brain and I followed them and I just went in with my imagination and it was the complete opposite, I guess, of meditating. But when she told me that she focused on her breath, I decided to kind of start to dive down the rabbit hole of meditation because I realized how bad I was at it. And so I wanted to get better at it because she was very calm and her presence was just like, I don't know how to explain it. She just seemed like she had her shit together. And not that I didn't have my shit together, but she really had her shit together. So she definitely understood what her purpose was, and you could see it by the way that she talked, by the way that she carried herself, and I was in a state of like, what am I doing with my life? But through meditation and getting better at that, so it took me probably, I don't know, 6 to 8 months of just doing it day in and day out, over and over and over, and just kind of fighting my mind and getting to a point where I could silence my mind and sit in silence. It was a battle. It was definitely a battle trying to silence your mind, trying to silence the ego. And then that's why they call it a practice, right? You just kind of keep doing it. So I stayed with it, and I had a couple really, I don't know, uplifting or energizing spiritual awakenings, if you will. Where I really was able to kind of connect with my body and connect with my mind and connect with my heart through meditation. And I started doing all these other practices like journaling and yoga and all of these different ways to kind of experience more calmness and more serenity in my life. So it was a lot of wellness practices that I was doing. But that brought me to the meditation with asking myself the important questions that for my entire life I have never asked myself. I've never asked myself, what do I really want to do? What is my purpose? You know, what do I love doing? Because from childhood up until this stage where I made this big transition, I was just following the crowd. I was doing what society told us to do, is get a good comfy job and make sure you have health insurance and get a white picket fence and a puppy and blah blah blah. And I did all that. I did all that to the T. And I wasn't happy. I felt stagnant. I felt like a number. I didn't feel like a person. My whole day, every single day, was waking up to an alarm clock, an annoying buzzing sound, and then going to a job that I didn't really want to go to. I mean, I was good at it, but I didn't really want to go there. I didn't really want to sell life insurance to people. I mean, there were points where I thought that maybe I could be passionate about it, but I was just lying to myself. I wasn't really passionate about telling people, hey, you're gonna die, you should probably pay for this policy so that way your family's taken care of. Yes, there are benefits to life insurance. I'm not talking bad about it, but I just really started to question not only what I want, but all the societal structures that we're all consumed with, whether that's food, whether that's environmental, whether that's education. I started kind of questioning everything and trying to figure out what was important to me and what made sense to me. So this drove me down a path of a lot of research about my brain, number one. Dr. Joe Dispenza, he's a great, was he a neuroscientist, I think? Something like that, some big word, I don't know. He does a lot of research on the brain and the, I guess the mind-body or the mind-soul connection. So amazing work. So him and books from Pima Kadran and just like any wellness practice or anything that I can get my hands on or my body on to become a better version of myself, because what I was doing was not working. Like I said, I was doing my 9 to 5, I was going to work. After work, maybe I went to the gym, but for the most part, I was numb. I was drinking, I was smoking, I was doing things on the weekend that was just like obnoxious, and it was my lifestyle for a decade. I would work my 9 to 5, I would come home, I would crack open a few beers, and that was it. And I would just do it over and over and over. And eventually it caught up with me, and it got to the point where I'm like, wow, I really don't feel healthy. I started down this path of meditation, and it kind of domino affected into a whole bunch of other stuff. So the girl that I was dating, like I said before, she was also a ballroom instructor. And so I said, you know, my little hopeless romantic side of me was like, all right, I'm gonna learn how to waltz and do something special with her for Christmas. And then I went to a ballroom studio, a Fred Astaire studio, and I said, I want to learn how to waltz. And I quickly realized that I have no idea how to dance. And so that was another thing. So meditation and dance were two things I have never done before, and I did them, and I was really, really bad at them. And it bothered me because I was always an athletic person. I was always competitive because I have a twin brother, so we were always in competition. And I could pick up sports pretty quickly, but these two things, meditation and ballroom dancing, I could not pick up. And it haunted me. It haunted me so much where I spent a lot of money in the ballroom to learn how to do this, and also just a lot of time by myself in meditation. And those two things alone kind of set me on this path of being transformed. And they were healthy habits, so they replaced my boozing and smoking weed. So it was good for me to do that. And you know, with meditation, with researching my brain, with researching spirituality, with practicing yoga, with doing dance, obviously I wasn't gonna put crappy food in my body because I wanted nutrients to sustain this new lifestyle. So food has always been important to me. I've always been a foodie, but healthy food, you know, here and there. You know, I was big on just eating whatever was delicious. But I always loved cooking. I always loved cooking, and I always loved my relationship with food. And so prior to me having this farm, I had another property where I had a garden, and it wasn't a big garden. It was maybe 10, 15 feet by 30 feet, so it was a good size for one person. And just the connection that I had with growing the food and growing the plants from start to finish, you know, starting them as a little baby and then seeing them as they grow, you know, tomato plants that now get 7, 8 feet tall and just bursting with tomatoes. I was the guy that was going out to my garden, I was talking to my plants every day, and I was like, oh, you're so beautiful. I can't wait to eat you. That sounded a little provocative. But seriously, I was talking to my tomatoes and I was talking to my zucchini, and they were just so delicious. Like some of my best memories of first starting to grow food were going outside, going in the garden, just being in awe at how picture perfect the produce was, and being so grateful that I'm able to bring that inside and just cook it. And then the whole process of growing food from seed and taking care of it as a baby, and then all the way up to fruition where you're having it as a meal, it was just so rewarding. It was the relationship that you had with nourishing the plant, nourishing the soil, taking care of it, watering it, feeding it. It was like a little baby. And then the more that you take care of it, the more that you talk to it, the better the nutrients are going to be that come out of it and come onto your plate. And it was just, you could feel it. You could see the difference, you could taste the difference, you could feel the difference. You know, that was really where my relationship with food just kind of elevated when I was growing my own food. So throughout this meditation process, when I started actually getting good at being in silence, I started noticing a few things, and they really came up more so when I was journaling, because I could look back at what I was meditating on, or what was coming to me in meditation. And very randomly, I kept seeing these mushrooms pop up, and I'm like, what is this? Like, why do I keep seeing mushrooms? You know, I wasn't asking any questions. They were just kind of randomly just popping up in like the corner of my eye, you know, and I would notice them. I'd be aware of them, but I wouldn't really think much of them. There were times where I would write in my journal. When I really started getting into this, I was trying to ask myself the important questions of, like I said, what am I doing here? What is my purpose? What am I meant to do, or how am I meant to serve the community? And there were times where I'd write in my journal and it would just be page after page, line after line, page after page of, what do I want? What do I want? What do I want? What do I want? And just trying to send out that energy into the universe to hopefully find an answer. You don't get the answers immediately. They come shortly thereafter, you know, or sometimes it takes a while, but this is when the mushrooms started popping up. And I didn't really know what to think about all of it. So when I was doing all of my research on brain health, you know, there was a lot of documentaries, a lot of really interesting information about getting a different perspective on a different state of consciousness using medicine. So that be ayahuasca, or even cannabis, or psilocybin mushrooms. And so there was a lot of research that I did on different states of consciousness, because when you meditate, that's kind of what you're aiming to get into, is lowering your brain waves to usually like a theta or delta brainwave if you can, to experience that serene calmness. And so, you know, coming from a background of, you know, smoking weed, I was like, oh, well, you know, maybe the mushrooms that I keep seeing in my meditations mean I should do some psilocybin mushrooms to get a different perspective on what my purpose is. That wasn't the answer. That wasn't how this story started. However, my years of consuming alcohol and consuming marijuana and just completely numbing myself from my day-to-day and not being happy with my life sent me into a big state of anxiety and depression that I was trying to mask with these substances. And it was really difficult at times, very, very difficult. I was put on medication that really just kind of numbed me to a whole different level, where I felt like a zombie. And I was like, there's got to be a better solution to this. So, you know, I looked into psilocybin mushrooms. I looked into ayahuasca and things like that, that people are having these experiences where they do it one time and all of a sudden they're completely healed. And I'm like, what is this miracle, cure all, whatever, that people are doing with these medications? And I decided at one point, I'm gonna take psilocybin mushrooms. Now, my experience with psilocybin mushrooms when I was 17 years old was very, very, very bad. So bad where I told myself, I made a promise to myself that I'm never gonna do this again. I'm never gonna do it again. I was crying for about 8 hours. It was uncontrollable. And I just wanna say something. I'm not promoting drugs by any means, you know. This was just my experience and something that happened to me along my journey to really get me to a different state. I learned as much as I could about the psilocybin mushrooms, and there's only so much research you can do before you just start doing them. So I got a hold of some, and I was scared because of the experience that I had when I was 17 years old. And that fear came through on a couple different times when I did these. So I wasn't doing a lot when I was doing the psilocybin mushrooms. They say what's called a hero dose is 4 or 5 grams. I've never done anything like that. I did around a gram. So around a gram is enough to feel a fuzziness, let's just say, and sometimes you can hallucinate a little bit. So when it gets to the point of hallucinating, my body, my mind kind of fights it, and it was kind of shutting down, and it was giving me that awful experience because there was just this battle that was going on between my conscious state and between what the psilocybin wanted to show me. And we weren't on the same wavelength, we weren't on the same page. So there was a constant battle, and I never really had a good experience. So one day I took about 1.5 grams, and I then took another gram. And so collectively I had about 2.5 grams. And I realized when I took the the final gram, I said to myself, Pat, you know what you just did, right? You know how much you just took. And I've realized that the 2 other times prior to this that I've tried to do the mushrooms, the battle was there. But this time was different. This time I went in with an intention and almost a prayer that I said beforehand, where I wanted to heal myself from the anxiety that I was feeling every single day. And I'm gonna get emotional. So I went in with the intention of, I'm healing. I'm gonna heal myself. I don't want to suffer from this anxiety anymore. And I allowed myself to kind of open up to whatever this psilocybin was going to show me. And the feeling of surrender, my hair's standing up just talking about it, the feeling of surrender that I had just completely wiped through my whole body, especially when it first kicked in. So the whole episode of the psilocybin experience is a whole other story, which I will probably do a video on soon, but I just want to keep it short because that's not the purpose of this video. But long story short, I had the most amazing experience. It was about 2.5 hours. It completely changed my life. I had this wave rush through me that just opened up, and it felt like every toxic thing that was in my body was just completely wiped free. And for the next 3 days, I felt like I was on cloud 9. I felt like I was floating. It was amazing. And from there on out, if I could give it a percentage, I would say about 80 to 90% of my anxiety that I was experiencing on a regular basis was gone. I would still have the anxiety, but I would be able to process it better. I would be able to sit with it. I would be able to accept it instead of fighting it. And it just changed me. It changed me so much. And then I realized after that, maybe a couple weeks after that, that was an experience that I needed to have, but that was also not the mushrooms that were coming up in my meditation, because I kept seeing them. I kept seeing the mushrooms after that, so they were still popping up in my meditation, and so I kept asking the question, like, what are these? Like, why do I keep seeing these? Why do I keep seeing mushrooms? But it was also along the lines of, what do I really want to do? And that was one of the reasons that I wanted to do the psilocybin, is because I wanted to get maybe a different perspective or some clarity on my thought process on what my purpose is. Because I knew it wasn't sitting behind a desk selling insurance, banging my head against a computer, telling people that they're going to die and selling them a policy. That's not how I wanted to spend my days. I wanted to do something creative. I wanted to use my artistic abilities if I could, and I wanted to do something that was beautiful. And sitting behind a desk and talking on a phone with a headset was not beautiful to me. It was just a paycheck. So I woke up one day and I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I was sitting on my job for a decade, and I just said, that's it. I'm done. I was completely tapped out. I didn't have anything left in me. I didn't tell anybody I was quitting. I just stopped going to work. People were like, what's going on? Where's Pat? Because I was the #1 salesperson, not just in my area, but in the company, in the whole company. So when I went MIA, people were kind of asking questions like, what is going on? So I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew what I didn't want to do, and I didn't want to sit behind a computer anymore. Through this meditation process for now, I guess between 8 and 12 months, I was convinced that I didn't need anything. There was one point where I said, all right, as long as I have my brain and I have my thoughts collected the way that I have, I could literally just go live in my car. I would just go live in my car and I would be happy. Realistically, I can't do that because I have a family to support. At this time, I had a daughter who was just a couple years old. She's now 6 years old. And then my son just turned 3. So that was another thing too, is, leaving my corporate job with health benefits, with my years of service, and being a single father, and then not having anything lined up for employment, people were like, okay, what's going on? And I didn't care what people thought. I never really cared what people thought. I knew that I needed to go through a process, and my process was eliminating things that didn't serve me anymore. So I sold my old house, I bought a new property. I bought a property with the intention of building a farm because I wanted to follow my heart. And throughout my journal entries, I said, what do I really like doing? I like gardening, I like food. I always wanted to get into farming. It was years ago, it was about, 8 years ago. I actually moved to Texas, where my mother was, with the intention of starting a farm there. Long story short, that didn't happen, and I ended up back here. So it was kind of always in my system somewhere that I wanted to farm. I wanted to get my hands dirty. I wanted to work with the soil. I wanted to grow food. And I couldn't just jump into a job with farming because, number one, I didn't have any experience. And number two, I have a child now that I had to support. So farming really doesn't pay much, and I couldn't really work for apples and tomatoes. I needed to make a living. So I bought the property that I'm at right now with the intention of having just a small vegetable farm. I was gonna do your eggplants, your tomatoes, your peppers, your squash, things like that. After crunching the numbers, I realized that it was gonna be an awful lot of tomatoes to pay my mortgage. So I started looking into things. I started looking into what's called cash crops, things that I could do year-round that were sustainable, that would help support this little dream of mine. So I was looking at ginseng and goji berries and microgreens. Microgreens was one of the first things that came to my attention because I'm like, oh, it's a plant. I can grow a plant, and I could do it year-round, and I could do it under lights, and there's so many different varieties that you could do of microgreens. So I started buying them, and I'm like, these things are delicious. I learned about all the health benefits for them too. And I was like, all right, this is what I'm gonna do. This is what I'm gonna focus on for a little while. And so for about 8 months, I focused on microgreens, and I was learning, and I was building, and I was doing as much as I could. I was still gonna do the other stuff outside, the tomatoes, the eggplant, things like that. But this was gonna be my crop that was going to sustain this little farm dream of mine. And I got really comfortable. I got to the point where I was like, all right, this is gonna be the business. And I invited over a couple other microgreen farmers just to kind of see how their packaging was, see how their delivery was, see how their product was. And I remember I was talking to one guy on my farm, and I go, listen, the only reason that you're here is because I want to do what you're doing. And he goes, man, there are so many people doing microgreens right now. The market is so saturated. And I was like, dude, you just peed in my Cheerios. You just took a dump in my Cheerios. But it wasn't funny because for 8 months I was like, this is gonna be my business, this is what I'm gonna do. And then he goes, nah, don't do it. And I'm like, shit. He goes, but you should get into mushrooms. There's a huge niche for mushrooms. And I just thought it was so ironic that he said that, because as I'm meandering down this path of learning about the agricultural industry and the farming industry, let's just say I overlearned, and I learned way too much about how our food is actually getting to our tables, and that forced me to go plant-based. So I was eating mushrooms almost every single day, almost every single meal, but I was only getting the mushrooms that you find at the store, the shiitakes, the portobellos, the cremini, the button mushrooms, all your typical mushrooms. And he goes, you should look at gourmet mushrooms. And I go, okay, I'll look into it. And it was maybe about a week later, I decided to look into it. And I was like, what is this world? Like, where do I find gold mushrooms, pink mushrooms, blue mushrooms, like all these different shapes and sizes and colors and textures? I'm like, where are they? How do I find these? You can't find them in the store. And so, I asked Google, I said, Google, where do I find these? And farmers markets. So that was my first mission, was go to a farmer's market, find the mushrooms. I did that. I brought them home, I cooked them up, and I'm like, these are amazing. And so I was hooked. That was the sinker that got me to bite on the hook. And And so my next thing was, all right, let me try and grow some. So I went to Amazon and I looked up mushroom grow kit, and I bought a grow kit, and I think it was blue oyster, and I followed the instructions and it came out awful. They looked like they were mutated, they were from another planet. But just the process of growing the mushroom and seeing how much it grew, where it doubled in size pretty much every day, I was just fascinated by it. And I was like, this is pretty cool. And so I continued down this rabbit hole, and I started to do a whole bunch of different methods for cultivating my own mushrooms. And so my initial stages were starting on straw. They say if you start on straw, that's the easiest way to go. So I did that, and I was growing oyster mushrooms on straw. I grew my very first oyster mushroom in my bathroom, and I said, this is it. This is what I want to do. I said, I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what I need to do to get there, but just the beauty of growing the mushroom and the relationship, it was just, I was sold. It was my heart connecting to my purpose in that moment of finding a mushroom in my bathroom. I wasn't working. So for 14, 16-hour days, I was studying. I was looking at every documentary. I was watching every single YouTube video 2 or 3 times or more on cultivation. And I didn't have a whole bunch of money to start, and that's the reason why a lot of people don't start the mushroom business, is because mushrooms and microgreens, yeah, you can do them year-round indoors, but it is a big amount of capital to get started in mushrooms, because there is a whole lot of equipment that is involved with the sterilization process, to the fruiting room, to just everything start to finish. So I didn't have a lot of money, so I had to learn how to build all of this machinery. There's a couple things that I couldn't build, like my flow hood and the sterilizer, but everything else, I had to learn how to do it. So from the ground up, it was just really from bare bones. And there was a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of things that didn't work, and it was a big learning curve. But you know what? This process of growing the farm outside and learning, just the same way that I was learning how to meditate and learning how to do the ballroom, the ability to learn again was just something that was I missed it. I missed it because for the last decade, I didn't have to learn. I was the best at what I did at my job, and that was it. I was just the master at it. So there's nothing else to learn. But I was in this stage where I was just like a child, and I was consuming as much information as possible about mushrooms, and I was floored. I was in love. And it very quickly turned into my labor of love, and I started building. I said, this is going to be a mushroom farm, and I started practicing. I was cultivating. I was continuously learning about the health benefits, about ways to cook the mushrooms, different ways to cultivate the mushrooms, just anything and everything I could. And so I guess it took about 2 years. 2 years to build the farm and get comfortable enough with cultivating the mushrooms that I decided that I was going to open up a business. And I had no idea what I was doing when I was opening up a business, because I had no idea what I was doing throughout this entire process, but I was just having fun with it. So I was the wood chip guy in town for a little while, because when I realized I wanted to do mushrooms and I wanted to do a farm, one of the first things that I did when I moved to this property was take my very nice clean cut grass and just cover it with about 1 foot of mulch, because I was going to build the biggest garden that I possibly could. Here in the center of town, like there's the traffic going by, there's a big church and town hall right down the street, not even like 1/10 of a mile away. I'm really smack dab right in the center of town. So I wanted to make a statement, because everybody has these little cookie cutter houses with their grass all perfect, and the rocks are placed in perfect little perfectness places, and I'm like, I'm just gonna mess people up. So I had these mounds of wood chips on my property for, I don't know, 6 months, because I don't have a tractor, so everything was really done by hand, which was just fun. But like I said, it was my therapy, kind of building everything. So I built the outdoor farm, I built the indoor farm, and I was ready to roll. And I bought my neon mushroom sign, I put it up on my door, And after I went through the whole process of getting, you know, the town approved and yada yada, all that paperwork, all the fun stuff, I flicked on my mushroom sign. And it was January 1st of 2023 that I opened my business. And for the first few months, everyone just drove by because a little neon mushroom sign that lit up in the middle of winter, because it was dark, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, people just saw a neon mushroom sign. And so I had people coming in at 8 or 9 o'clock at night saying, "What are you doing in here?" And I go, "Look." And I was pointing to this, which you see behind me, my fruiting room. So you can see all the mushrooms growing in here. So it's not a psilocybin head shop like people thought with the neon mushroom sign. It's actually gourmet mushrooms. And so once people started realizing what it was, the word got out super quick, and this place started flooding with people. Like, I had a line out the door. People had never seen these mushrooms before. They had all the sorts of questions, and it was just, I was overwhelmed with so much gratitude that all these people were just coming to my little shop just to see about what these mushrooms were. And I was like, my heart was open. I don't know how else to explain it. You know, and I do microreens still too. So I do the mushrooms and the microreens. And being able to share my knowledge and share my story and share my path of how I got here, it helps to inspire people too. And I hope that it inspires you guys too, because so much of us, I feel, are stuck at our 9 to 5s, banging our head on the desk, wondering, something's got to change, right? And you know, everybody goes to the definition of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Well, don't be insane. Do something different. Follow your heart. Take time for yourself. Collect your thoughts. Sit in silence. Find the clarity that you need so you can get on the path that you want to be on and not the one that you are on if you're not happy. And that was the biggest thing for me, is going through that transitional period of doing something that was comfy to being in a state of fear for a little while, and not knowing what I was going to do or how I was going to get there, but just sitting in silence. And you know, at first it's like, well, how am I going to pay my bills? Well, how am I going to buy food? Well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? All these fear-based questions started coming up. But I got to a point where I just started kind of becoming aware of these questions that I was asking. I was digesting them, and I was also just finding solutions. So the reason that I'm doing this channel is because I wanted to share my journey of how I was able to break out of the matrix and do my own thing and follow my heart. And I feel like if we are surrounded with a community of people that continue to do that, I mean, it's going to be a beautiful thing, instead of people that are just kind of depressed or anxious or sad all the time because they have to go to work. I don't have to go to work. I want to go to work every day. And so I want to share my journey about, again, how I made this transition, how I was able to open up my heart and follow my passion and find my passion, and also, you know, how I'm going to cultivate these mushrooms, how I'm going to cook the mushrooms, how I do my tinctures, how I share with you the medicinal benefits of the mushrooms, along with the culinary side, and just continuing down this process of working with love and not working with fear. If you guys made it this far, thank you for watching. There is a lot of other information that I do want to share with you, and if there's anything that you guys want to see, just leave a comment down for me on anything, any questions that you guys have. I'm happy to answer them. Also, I do have a website. It's called theunioncityfarm.com, and on the website you can buy any of my tinctures. I also sell my mushroom jerky. If you're looking for fresh mushrooms though, you got to come to Connecticut. The address for the farm is 12 Union City Road in Prospect, and just stay tuned because we're only getting started on this journey, and there is much more that I want to share with you. So thank you again.